You get nothing, old man. My daughter Victoria leaned across the mahogany table, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of inheriting her mother's $150 million empire. She thought she had won. She thought I was just a broken-down carpenter she could toss aside like scrapwood. I did not say a word. I just sat there in my flannel shirt and watched as Attorney Harrison turned the page of the will and cleared his throat. When he read the next sentence, the color did not just drain from Victoria's face, it vanished. She was not getting the millions. She was getting a lesson she would never forget. Before I continue this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand up to family members who forgot where they came from. Let me know in the comments what city you are watching from. It means a lot to hear from you. I am Garrison Ford. I have spent 70 years on this earth, and I built half the skyline of this city with my own 2 hands. But on that rainy Tuesday morning, I stood at the edge of the Green Ridge Cemetery like a stranger. My rusty Ford F-150 was parked a quarter-mile down the road because the valets would not take it. They looked at my work boots and my worn jacket and decided I did not belong. I watched from a distance as they lowered Catherine into the ground. My Catherine. We had been divorced for 20 years, but we built the foundation of Ford Enterprises together, mixing concrete before we ever hired a single employee. The woman in the casket was the love of my life, even if life took us in different directions. I took a step forward, just wanting to place a single white rose on the wood. That is when I felt a sharp hand on my shoulder. It was not a comforting touch. It was a shove. I turned to see my daughter Victoria. She was dressed in designer black silk that probably cost more than my entire cabin. Her eyes were dry. There was no grief there, only annoyance. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed loud enough for the nearby mourners to turn their heads. "Mom divorced you 2 decades ago. You are not welcome here." I looked at her, searching for the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders around job sites. She was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating woman who looked at me like I was something she stepped in. "I just want to pay my respects, Victoria," I said, my voice raspy from days of silence. "She was my wife once." Victoria let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She turned to the group of business partners standing nearby, men in $3,000 suits who were looking at us with curiosity. "Pay respects," she announced, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "This man abandoned us. He left my mother to build this company alone while he ran off to live in the woods like a hermit. He is only here because he smells money. He is here to beg." It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. I did not leave. I gave Catherine everything in the divorce because I felt guilty for working too much. I kept nothing but my dignity and a small plot of land. But Victoria did not know that. Or maybe she did not care. Then came Brett, my son-in-law, a man who has never had a callus on his hand in his life. He stepped up beside Victoria, smirking. "Let him stay, honey," Brett said loud enough for the crowd. "Someone has to clean up the trash after the reception. He looks dressed for it." He kicked the toe of my work boot with his polished Italian dress shoe. The disrespect made my fists clench at my sides. I could have flattened him. I used to haul steel beams, but I did not. I would not dishonor Catherine's memory with a brawl at her graveside. I swallowed my pride. I looked at the casket one last time, whispered a silent goodbye to the woman who knew the real story, and turned to walk away. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my jacket. As I passed a line of black umbrellas, a man I did not recognize bumped into me. He was older, wearing a trench coat, looking like he wanted to be invisible. He did not apologize. Instead, I felt his hand slip something into my pocket. He leaned in close, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Do not believe a word your daughter says. Be at the reading of the will tomorrow. Do not miss it." He disappeared into the crowd before I could ask who he was. I walked back to my truck alone in the rain. When I finally sat in the driver's seat, I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. It was a note handwritten on simple stationery. It just said, "Come to the office. Do not let them scare you away." I drove back to my cabin, my mind racing. My daughter thought I was weak. My son-in-law thought I was trash. They thought they had already won. But as I looked at that note, I realized the foundation of their victory was about to crack. I started the engine of my truck. Tomorrow, I would go to that office. Not to beg, but to see exactly what game they were playing. And I had a feeling the rules were about to change. The gravel crunched under the tires of my old Ford as I pulled up the winding driveway to my cabin. This place was not much to look at compared to the mansions Victoria and Brett lived in. It was built from cedar and stone materials I had hauled here myself 20 years ago after the divorce. It was small and drafty in the winter, but it was mine. It was the only piece of earth I had left where I did not have to apologize for existing. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain tap against the roof. The silence of the woods usually calmed me, but today my blood was still boiling from the cemetery. I reached for the door handle, ready to go inside and pour a stiff drink when I saw something that made my stomach turn. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling near the edge of the clearing. Behind it was a white van with the logo of a survey company I recognized from my days in the industry. Men in orange vests were already walking across my property line, hammering wooden stakes into the soft ground. I did not even bother closing my truck door. I jumped out and marched toward them, ignoring the ache in my knees. "Get off my land," I shouted. My voice echoed off the trees. The men in the vests stopped and looked toward the SUV. The back door opened slowly. Brett stepped out. He had changed from his funeral suit into what he probably thought was casual country wear, a designer vest and pristine boots that had never seen a speck of mud until this moment. He held a rolled-up set of blueprints in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. "Garrison," he said, flashing that same arrogant smile he had worn at the grave. "You really should get that truck fixed. We could hear you coming from a mile away." I walked right up to him until I was close enough to smell his expensive cologne. It turned my stomach. "I told you to get off my land, Brett. I am not going to ask twice." Brett laughed a dry, humorless sound. He unrolled the blueprints and held them up. "See, that is the funny thing, Garrison. It is not your land anymore. Technically, it never really was." "What are you talking about?" "We did a little audit of the company assets last week. Turns out this plot was purchased under the Ford Enterprises umbrella back in '85. Victoria filed the paperwork this morning. This cabin and the 5 acres around it are officially company property." "You are lying," I said, though a cold shiver ran down my spine. "Catherine and I bought this land cash. It was separate. It was always separate." "Well, the paperwork says otherwise," Brett said, shrugging. "And since Victoria is the acting CEO and sole heir, she has authorized a new development project. We are breaking ground in 48 hours. "Breaking ground for what?" "A parking lot," Brett said, looking around at the trees I had planted with my own hands. "We are building a luxury golf course adjacent to this property. We need a place for the members to park their cars. This shack is right in the middle of the VIP section." He called my home a shack. He wanted to pave over the last thing I had. The last place where I felt like a human being, just so his rich friends could park their Porsches. I turned around and walked to the cabin without saying a word. Finally giving up, old man Brett called out behind me, "Smart move. Pack a bag. You have until Friday." I did not pack a bag. I went to the gun rack above the fireplace. I took down my old double-barrel shotgun. It had not been fired in years, and I knew for a fact it was not loaded. I did not keep shells in the house. But Brett did not know that. I walked back out onto the porch and cracked the barrel open, then snapped it shut with a loud metallic clack. The sound was unmistakable. The surveyors dropped their hammers and backed away, hands raised. Brett dropped his blueprints. His smug smile vanished instantly. "Whoa, Garrison. Are you crazy?" he stammered, backing up against the SUV. "Put that down. You have 3 seconds to get off my property," I said, raising the stock to my shoulder. 1. "You are going to jail for this," Brett screamed, scrambling to get the door open. "This is assault." 2. He dove into the back seat of the SUV. The driver did not wait for instructions. He slammed on the gas tires, spinning in the mud, throwing dirt everywhere as they peeled out of the driveway. The survey van followed close behind, leaving their equipment scattered on the grass. I stood there on the porch, my chest heaving, the heavy wood of the gun pressing against my shoulder. I watched until their taillights disappeared around the bend. Slowly, I lowered the weapon. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so deep it felt like it was burning a hole in my gut. They were not just greedy. They were trying to erase me. They did not just want the money. They wanted to strip me of my home, my history, my very footprint on this earth. Victoria wanted to bury me right alongside her mother, but she wanted to do it while I was still breathing. I saw a piece of paper fluttering in the wind where Brett had been standing. He must have dropped it in his panic. I walked down the steps and picked it up. It was a court order, a temporary eviction notice stamped by a judge. I recognized the judge's name. He was a man who played poker with Brett on Saturdays. It was a fake, or at least a favor called in to bypass the law. They were corrupt to the bone. I looked at the cabin. It was small and weathered, but it stood strong. I built the foundation myself. I reinforced every beam. It could withstand a storm, and so could I. I remembered the note in my pocket from the stranger at the cemetery. "Do not let them scare you away. They thought taking my home would break me. They thought threatening me with bulldozers would make me crawl away and die in some dark corner." They were wrong. I crumpled the fake court order in my fist. I was not going to run. I was going to that lawyer's office tomorrow. If they wanted a war, I would bring them a war. I walked back inside and placed the shotgun on the table. I did not need bullets. I had something stronger. I had the truth, and tomorrow I was going to use it to bring their whole world crashing down. The elevator ride to the 30th floor of the Harrison and Partners building felt like ascending into a different world. My ears popped as the numbers climbed, leaving the noise and the grit of the street far below. I smoothed the front of my flannel shirt, conscious of the sawdust that always seemed to cling to the fabric, no matter how many times I washed it. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, wrinkled her nose as I approached. She did not have to say a word. Her eyes said it all. "Deliveries are in the back." "I am here to see Arthur Harrison," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am Garrison Ford." Her eyebrows shot up. She typed something into her computer, her long nails clicking against the keys like hail on a tin roof. After a long pause, she buzzed the heavy oak doors open. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you in the main conference room." I walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of old men who looked like they had never held a hammer in their lives. The air smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. It was the smell of money. It was the smell of the world Catherine and I had built, but a world I had chosen to leave behind. When I pushed open the double doors to the conference room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. It was a cavernous space dominated by a table long enough to land a plane on. And sitting at the far end, looking like royalty, holding court, were Victoria and Brett. They did not look like people in mourning. Victoria was wearing a white dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a reading of a will. She was typing furiously on her phone, a glass of sparkling water sitting on a coaster beside her. Brett was leaning back in his leather chair, his feet resting on the table, tossing a set of car keys into the air and catching them. They stopped when I entered. Brett slowly took his feet off the table, but he did not stand up. Victoria just smirked, a cold twisting of her lips that chilled my blood. "You actually showed up," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I thought you would be busy packing your boxes. You know, before the bulldozers arrive. I ignored her. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. I placed my calloused hands on the polished wood, anchoring myself. I was not going to let them see me bleed. Arthur Harrison entered the room a moment later. He was a good man, older than me, with thinning white hair and a spine that was beginning to curve under the weight of his years. He carried a thick leather folder. He looked tired. When he saw me, his eyes softened, but when he looked at Victoria and Brett, his expression hardened into professional neutrality. "Good morning," Arthur said, taking his seat at the head of the table. He set the folder down with a heavy thud. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Catherine Ford. This is a difficult time, and I ask that we proceed with respect and dignity." He opened the folder. I saw the thick document inside, bound in blue paper. It was the will Catherine and I had drafted 20 years ago, updated only slightly over the years. I knew what was in it, or at least I thought I did. Before Arthur could read the first line, Brett cleared his throat. It was a loud, obnoxious sound. "Hold on a second, Art," Brett said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Before you start reading that old history book, you might want to look at this." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was wrinkled as if it had been crumpled up and then flattened out again. It looked out of place in this room of pristine documents and high-priced suits. Arthur frowned. He picked up the paper, adjusting his glasses. "What is this?" "It is a codicil," Victoria said, leaning forward. Her eyes were wide, feigning innocence. "Mom wrote it last week. She was lucid. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to make some changes." Arthur read the paper in silence. His brow furrowed deeper with every line. I watched his hands. They started to tremble slightly. He looked up at Victoria, then at me, then back at the paper. This changes everything," Arthur whispered. "Read it," Victoria commanded. "Read it out loud so he can hear it." Arthur took a deep breath. He looked at me with an apology in his eyes. "I, Catherine Ford, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments regarding the distribution of my primary assets. Due to the abandonment by my ex-husband, Garrison Ford, and the unwavering love and care provided by my daughter, Victoria, and her husband, Brett, during my final days, I hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including the $150 million in liquid assets, all real estate holdings, and the controlling interest in Ford Enterprises solely to Victoria Ford Grant. Garrison Ford is to receive nothing. Zero." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the blood rushing in my ears. Nothing. Zero. It was not about the money. I did not need their millions. I had lived on beans and rice for months. I could survive. But the words abandonment and unwavering care twisted in my gut like a rusty knife. "That is a lie," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. Victoria let out a dramatic sob. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "How dare you!" she cried, peering through her fingers to make sure everyone was watching. "How dare you call my mother a liar? I was there, Dad. I was there every single day." I wiped her brow. I fed her soup when she was too weak to lift a spoon. I held her hand while she cried because you were not there. You were out in the woods, playing hermit, while she withered away. She realized who truly loved her in the end. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew the truth. I had seen the truth. Victoria had put Catherine in the Golden Sunset nursing home, a place that looked fancy on the outside, but was a prison on the inside. She visited once a month to get checks signed. I was the one who snuck in through the service entrance after hours. I was the one who sat by her bed while she slept. I was the one who saw the bruises on her arms from where the nurses grabbed her too hard because Victoria cut the budget for private care. "Unwavering care," I repeated, looking straight at Brett. Is that what you call it? Brett smirked. We did what was best for her, and she rewarded us. It is right there in black and white, old man. She hated you. She died hating you. Arthur Harrison cleared his throat again. He laid the paper down on the table, but he did not let go of it. He looked at the signature at the bottom. This signature, Arthur said slowly. It is erratic. She was dying, Arthur. Victoria snapped, her tears vanishing instantly. She was weak. Of course it is shaky. Are you questioning my mother's last wishes? I am questioning the validity of a handwritten document produced at the last minute that contradicts 20 years of legal planning. Arthur said, his voice firming up. This document is not notarized. There are no witnesses listed other than you and Brett. We were the only ones there because we were the only ones who cared. Victoria screamed. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. You are trying to steal this from me. You are conspiring with him. I know you are friends. You have always taken his side. Sit down, Victoria, Arthur said calmly. I am not taking sides. I am taking the law seriously. This estate is valued at over $150 million. I cannot simply hand over the keys to the kingdom based on a piece of notebook paper. It is a legal codicil, Brett shouted. It is suspicious, Arthur countered. And under the laws of this state, when a will is contested or when a suspicious amendment appears, the assets are frozen until a probate court can verify the authenticity of the document. Frozen, Victoria's face went pale. What do you mean, frozen? I mean that nobody gets a dime today, Arthur said. I am suspending the reading of the will. I am going to hire a forensic handwriting expert to analyze this signature. I am going to subpoena the medical records from the nursing home to determine if Catherine was truly of sound mind when this was written. And until I am satisfied, the money stays in the trust. Victoria looked like she had been slapped. She looked at Brett, and I saw a flicker of genuine terror in her eyes. They needed that money. I knew they were in debt, but the sheer panic in their reaction told me it was worse than I thought. They were on the edge of a cliff, and they had just been told the rescue helicopter was not coming. You can't do this, Victoria hissed. We have expenses. We have obligations. Then I suggest you get jobs, I said. Victoria whipped her head around to look at me. Her eyes were filled with pure venom. This is your fault, she spat. You just couldn't die, could you? You just couldn't disappear. You have to ruin everything even when you have nothing. I stood up slowly. I was 20 years older than Brett, but I had spent my life lifting lumber and stone. I was made of iron. He was made of dough. I leaned over the table. I built this company, Victoria. Your mother and I built it from the dirt up. We didn't do it so you could turn it into a piggy bank for your vanity. If Catherine wrote that note, I will walk away. I will sign over the deed to my cabin and I will leave. But if I find out you forced her hand, if I find out you tormented that woman in her final hours to get what you wanted, I let the threat hang in the air. I did not need to finish the sentence. Victoria pulled herself up to her full height. She grabbed her purse, her knuckles white. You want to fight, Dad? Fine. You got one. I am going to sue this firm for malpractice. I am going to sue you for harassment. I have the best lawyers in the city on speed dial. By the time I am done with you, you won't just be homeless. You will be buried under so much legal debt, you will wish you had stayed in that cabin and rotted. She turned to Arthur. You have 24 hours to release those funds, Arthur, or I am burning this whole firm to the ground. Come on, Brett. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. Brett scrambled to grab his car keys from the table, shooting me one last glare before following her like an obedient puppy. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence in the room. Arthur let out a long sigh and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, his face aged with worry. Garrison, he said softly. That signature. It looks like hers. It is shaky, yes, but the loops, the pressure points. If a forensic expert looks at this, there is a 50-50 chance they rule it genuine. And if they do, she gets everything. I walked over to the window and looked down at the city below. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray and heavy. She didn't write it, Arthur, I said. Not of her own free will. How do you know? Because Catherine and I had a fail-safe, I said, turning back to him. We knew Victoria was greedy. We saw the signs when she was a teenager. We created a protocol, a way to protect the legacy if one of us died and the other was compromised. Arthur looked confused. I have been your lawyer for 30 years, Garrison. I never saw any protocol. You wouldn't have, I said. We didn't put it in the legal files. We put it in the architecture. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled note the stranger had given me at the cemetery. It was not just a warning. On the back in faint pencil was a set of numbers, coordinates. Arthur, I need you to stall them. Give me 48 hours. What are you going to do? I'm going to find the real will, I said. And I think I know exactly where she hid it. But I need you to hold the line. If they get access to those accounts before I find the proof, they will drain them dry and disappear. Arthur looked at the fake codicil, then at me. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. I will bury them in paperwork, Garrison. I will demand medical reviews, witness affidavits, the works. I can buy you 2 days, maybe 3. But after that, if you don't have proof, 2 days is all I need. I walked out of the office, leaving the scent of lemon polish and greed behind me. I had a job to do. I had to go back to the beginning, back to the foundations. Victoria thought this was about papers and lawyers. She didn't realize that when you build something to last, you always leave a blueprint for repairs, and I was about to tear her renovations down to the studs. Arthur waited until the echo of Victoria's high heels had faded completely from the hallway before he moved. He stood up slowly, walked to the heavy oak doors, and turned the brass lock with a definitive click. The silence that filled the room was heavy smelling of old paper and the lingering tension of a family at war. He walked back to the table, not to his chair at the head, but to the seat right next to me. He looked older than his 75 years, in that moment, his eyes watery behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Garrison, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I am about to show you could cost me my license if anyone found out I withheld it from the probate court even for an hour. But Catherine made me promise. She said it was for your eyes only, and only if the vultures started circling. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. It looked too modern, too fragile for a man like Arthur, but he handled it like it was a diamond. He plugged it into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. It was recorded 3 days before she passed, Arthur said. One of the night nurses, a woman named Maria, smuggled the phone in. Victoria had confiscated all of Catherine's communication devices, but Maria was loyal. I stared at the black screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. I was afraid to look. I was afraid to see what the cancer and the loneliness had done to the woman I had loved since we were 18 years old. Arthur hit the spacebar. The video was shaky at first, the camera angle low and awkward, hidden under a blanket or a pillow. Then the image settled. It was Catherine. She was lying in a hospital bed that looked too big for her shrunken frame. Her hair, once a thick mane of chestnut, was thin and gray. Her skin was translucent, but her eyes were the same. They were sharp, intelligent, and blazing, with a fierce determination that death could not extinguish. She looked straight into the lens, and for a second I felt like she was sitting right there in the room with me. Garrison, she rasped. Her voice was weak, wheezing with every breath, but the steel was still there. If you are seeing this, then I am gone. And if Arthur is showing you this, it means Victoria has done exactly what we always feared she would do. She has forgotten who she is. She has forgotten the code. She paused, coughing painfully. I reached out to touch the screen, a useless gesture, but I could not stop myself. I do not have much time, Garrison, she continued, her breathing shallow. The medication. It makes my mind foggy. But I need you to focus. Do not listen to the lawyers. Do not listen to the threats. You need to go back to 1985. 1985. The year changed everything. I leaned in closer. Project Blue Sky, Garrison, she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine. Do you remember the foundation was cracked? We knew it would not hold the weight of the tower. I tried to fix it, but the concrete was already set. The only way to save the structure was the patch. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. I hid the patch in the old spot, Garrison, where the fire starts. It is the only thing that holds the house together. Find the patch. Fix the foundation. Do not let them tear it down. The video cut to black. Arthur sat back, looking at me with confusion written all over his face. I have watched that video 10 times, Garrison, Arthur said. I have gone through every file in the firm dating back to the 80s. There is no Project Blue Sky. We have no records of a cracked foundation on any of the major towers. Was she delirious? Was it the morphine talking? I sat there staring at the blank screen, but I was not seeing the reflection of the office. I was seeing a drafting table in a cramped apartment 40 years ago. I was seeing Catherine, young and vibrant, leaning over my shoulder as I drew the blueprints for what would become our life. She was not delirious. Arthur, I said, my voice steady for the first time that day. She was the smartest person I have ever known. She was speaking in code. Code. Everyone thinks I was just a contractor, I said, standing up and pacing the room. They think I just poured cement and hammered nails. They forget that I was the one who designed the systems. I was the architect, Arthur. Catherine handled the business, but I handled the structure. 1985 was the year Ford Enterprises landed its first multi-million-dollar contract. It was the year we became rich. But it was also the year we noticed something wrong with Victoria. She was only 8 years old, but she had stolen money from Catherine's purse to pay another child to do her homework. When we caught her, she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just asked why it mattered as long as the work got done. That night, Catherine and I sat in our kitchen. We realized that our success might be the thing that ruined our daughter. We realized the foundation of our family was cracking under the weight of the wealth we were building. Project Blue Sky was not a building, I told Arthur. It was a failsafe. It was a secret trust we established that year. We poured the majority of our assets into it, shielding them from liability from taxes and from family members who might lose their way. We named it Blue Sky because that is what you see when you look up from a deep hole. Arthur's eyes widened. A trust from 1985. If that exists, it predates the will. It predates the divorce settlement. It would supersede everything. But where are the documents? I have never seen them. That is the patch, I said. Catherine said she hid the patch in the old spot, where the fire starts. I knew exactly what she meant. When we bought the big manor house, the one Victoria lives in now, the one I was banned from entering, there was an original stone fireplace in the library. It was the heart of the house. I had restored it myself, stone by stone. Catherine used to sit there on winter nights reading while I worked on sketches. One of the stones, the central keystone just above the mantel, had a hollow space behind it. It was a flaw in the masonry I had discovered during the renovation. Instead of filling it, I had fashioned a small, lead-lined box to fit inside, covering it with a false mortar face. We used to hide love notes in there for each other. We called it the patch because it fixed the only imperfection in the room. The documents for the trust are in the fireplace, I said. In Victoria's house. Arthur looked at me horrified. Garrison, you cannot go there. You heard her. She has threatened to call the police if you step foot on the property. If you break in, you will be giving them exactly what they need to lock you up. You will lose everything. I picked up my old trucker hat from the table and put it on. She thinks I am a senile old man who lives in the woods, Arthur. She thinks I am weak. She thinks she has won because she has the lawyers and the money. She forgot one thing. What is that? She forgot that I built that house, I said, walking toward the door. I know every loose board. I know every blind spot in the perimeter. I know how to get in without tripping an alarm because I installed the conduit for the wires. Garrison, wait! Arthur called out, standing up. I turned back to him. Give me 24 hours, Arthur. Keep them busy. File motions demand handwriting analysis. Do whatever lawyers do to stall. Just buy me one night. Arthur hesitated, then nodded slowly. Be careful, old friend. If they catch you... They won't catch me, I said. I left the office with a new fire burning in my chest. Catherine had not abandoned me. She had been protecting me. She had been protecting the legacy from the rot that had taken hold of our daughter. She had left me a map, and she had trusted me to be strong enough to follow it. I walked out into the city streets. The rain had started again, but I did not feel the cold. I had a mission. I had to break into the fortress I had built, steal the legacy I had created, and prove that you can bury a man's body, but you cannot bury the truth. Tonight the fox was going into the henhouse, and the wolves were going to learn that they were not the only predators in the dark. Ford Manor sat on the hill like a fortress of stone and glass, silhouetted against the moonlight. I parked my truck deep in the woods, covering the chrome bumper with a tarp to catch any stray reflections. I knew these woods better than the back of my hand. I knew where the deer trails ran and where the old drainage pipes cut through the earth. Victoria had spent thousands on high-tech security cameras and motion sensors, turning the home I built into a prison, but she made one critical mistake. She forgot that security systems rely on electricity, and electricity runs through conduits, and I was the one who laid every foot of pipe in that ground 30 years ago. I made my way to the north side of the property, moving slow and steady. My knees ached from the damp earth, but adrenaline is a powerful painkiller. I found the access panel for the auxiliary power hidden behind a cluster of rhododendrons I had planted for Catherine on our 10th anniversary. They had grown wild and thick, providing perfect cover. I used my multi-tool to unscrew the faceplate. Inside was a nest of wires that looked chaotic to a layman, but looked like a map to me. I located the bypass loop for the perimeter sensors and carefully bridged the connection. The green light on the panel didn't even flicker. To the monitoring company downtown, the system was humming along perfectly. To me, the back door was now wide open. I slipped through the garden entrance, the heavy French doors yielding silently to the master key I had kept on my ring for 2 decades. Stepping inside was like walking into a stranger's house. The warmth was gone. The oak floors I had sanded by hand were covered in cold white marble. The walls, once painted in warm earth tones Catherine loved, were now a stark clinical gray. It smelled of chemical cleaner and expensive soulless potpourri. It broke my heart to see how quickly Victoria had erased us, painting over our memories with the color of her vanity. I did not have time to mourn the decor. I moved through the shadows of the hallway, avoiding the patches of moonlight that spilled through the windows. The library was at the end of the west wing. It was the one room I prayed she had not destroyed. When I pushed the door open, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was mostly intact. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were still there, though they were filled with decorative vases instead of books now. But the fireplace, the massive stone hearth that anchored the entire house, stood unchanged. I crossed the room, my boots silent on the rug. I knelt before the fireplace. It was cold. They never used it. They preferred the automated climate control. I ran my hand along the rough stone of the mantel until I found it. The keystone. To anyone else, it looked just like the others, gray granite with a vein of quartz running through it. But I knew the mortar around it was a silicone compound mixed with dust, not cement. I pulled a small pry bar from my jacket pocket and wedged it into the hairline crack. With a gentle twist, the stone shifted. I worked it loose, sweating despite the cool air in the room. It slid out with a grinding sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I reached into the dark cavity behind it. My fingers brushed against dust and cobwebs before hitting cold metal. I pulled out the lead-lined box. It was heavy, sealed tight against the years. I didn't open it yet. I shoved it into my deep jacket pocket, feeling its weight against my ribs, like a second heart. I reached back in to make sure nothing else was there, and my fingers grazed leather. A book. Catherine's diary. I grabbed it, my hands shaking. This was it. This was the proof. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. I froze. The sound of a door slamming upstairs reverberated through the house. Then voices. Angry, loud voices. I scrambled to my feet. I couldn't go back out the way I came. The library door was in direct line of sight of the main staircase. I dove behind the heavy velvet curtains that covered the bay window, pressing my back against the cold glass, just as the library door swung open. The lights flicked on, flooding the room with a harsh glare. I held my breath, peering through a slit in the fabric. It was Brett. He was wearing a silk robe that looked ridiculous on him, pacing back and forth, a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked disheveled, his face flushed red. He wasn't alone in the room, but he was talking to someone who wasn't there. "I am telling you, Rocco." "I need more time," Brett hissed into the phone, taking a large gulp of the whiskey. The old man showed up. "Yeah, her father. He is contesting the will." The lawyers froze the assets. He paced closer to the window. I could smell the alcohol on him from where I stood. "No, you listen to me," Brett snapped, his voice rising in panic. "You cannot touch me. We had a deal. $5 million as soon as the old witch died. That was the deal. I did my part. I got her to sign the paper. I got the daughter to play along. It is not my fault the lawyer grew a conscience. My blood ran cold. $5 million. Brett wasn't just a leech. He was a gambler in deep with loan sharks. That explained the desperation. That explained the rush to bulldoze my cabin. They needed to liquidate assets immediately. Brett stopped pacing and lowered his voice, turning away from the window. "Don't you threaten her, Rocco. Leave Tiffany out of this. She doesn't know anything about the money. She thinks I am a real estate mogul. Look, just give me 48 hours. We are going to scare the old man off. We are going to bulldoze his shack tomorrow, court order or not. Once he sees we are serious, he will fold. He is weak. He is nobody." He hung up the phone and threw it onto the leather sofa. He stood there for a moment, running his hands through his hair, letting out a groan of pure frustration. Then he walked over to the fireplace. My heart stopped. The stone was back in place, but the mortar dust was fresh on the hearth. If he looked down, if he paid even 1 second of attention, I was dead. Brett stared at the fireplace, then kicked the iron grate violently. "Damn it!" he screamed. He didn't look down. He turned and stormed out of the room, switching off the lights and slamming the door behind him. I waited for a full minute, listening to my own pulse thudding in my ears. I heard him stomping back up the stairs. I didn't wait any longer. I slipped out from behind the curtain, moved to the French doors, and let myself out into the night air. I didn't stop moving until I was back in the safety of the woods, the damp leaves soaking my boots. I leaned against a tree, gasping for air. I had the box. I had the diary. But more importantly, I had the truth. Brett was in debt for $5 million to people named Rocco. He had a mistress named Tiffany, and he had admitted out loud that he forced Catherine to sign that paper. I made my way back to the truck, the weight of the metal box banging against my hip with every step. They weren't just greedy children. They were desperate animals backed into a corner, and desperate animals are dangerous. Brett was planning to bulldoze my home regardless of the law. He was running out of time, which meant I was running out of time. I climbed into the cab of my truck and locked the doors. I placed the metal box and the diary on the passenger seat. I looked at them for a long moment. This was not just paperwork. This was ammunition. I started the engine, keeping the headlights off, until I hit the main road. The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. I was fighting a man who had a $5 million price on his head and nothing left to lose. I needed to get to Maria. I needed to get to Arthur. And I needed to do it before Brett realized that the ghost in his library had just stolen his only way out. Golden Sunset looked more like a 5-star resort than a place where people went to die. The lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and the fountains bubbled with artificially blue water. But I knew the smell of that place. Beneath the expensive potpourri and the fresh-cut flowers, it smelled of antiseptic and despair. I parked my truck around the back near the kitchen loading dock. I pulled a gray coverall from my toolbox, the one I used for painting, and strapped on my old leather tool belt. With a clipboard in hand and a cap pulled low over my eyes, I walked right past the delivery vans. I did not look like a grieving ex-husband or a millionaire architect. I looked like a man there to fix a leaky pipe, and in places like this, people like that are invisible. I navigated the service corridors, my boots squeaking softly on the linoleum. I knew Maria's schedule by heart. For 6 months, I had watched her from the shadows, slipping into Catherine's room only when Maria gave me the signal. She was the head nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a tired soul who had been the only source of comfort Catherine had in her final days. I found her in the linen closet counting stacks of towels. When I closed the door behind me, she jumped, dropping a bundle of sheets. "Mr. Ford," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "You cannot be here. If they see you, I will lose my job. They will ruin me." I held up my hands, showing her I meant no harm. "I need your help, Maria. I know what they did." Maria's face went pale. She backed away, shaking her head violently. "No, I cannot talk to you. I signed the papers, the non-disclosure agreement. Victoria said if I ever spoke to you or anyone else, she would sue me for everything I have. She said she would make sure I never work in this state again." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Victoria is a bully, Maria. She uses fear because that is all she has. But I have something else. I have Catherine's diary." Maria froze. "I found it," I continued. "In the house. She wrote about you, Maria. She wrote that you were the only one who treated her like a human being. She wrote that you tried to protect her." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She slumped against the shelves, her resistance breaking. "She was a good woman, Mr. Ford. She did not deserve to die like that." "Like what, Maria? Tell me. I need to know." Maria took a shuddering breath. She looked at the door, terrified that someone might be listening. Then she whispered the words that turned my blood to ice. "They killed her. Not with a pillow or a poison, but with cruelty." She told me about the night the codicil was signed. Tuesday. Catherine had been in and out of consciousness for days. The pain was bad, so Maria had her on a high dose of morphine to keep her comfortable. "Victoria and that husband of hers came in around 10 at night," Maria said, her voice trembling. "They told me to leave the room, but I stayed by the door. I listened. They were screaming at her, Mr. Ford, screaming at a dying woman to wake up. I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging into my palms. When she would not wake up, Victoria came out and ordered me to stop the morphine," Maria continued, tears streaming down her face. "She said her mother needed to be lucid to sign important papers. I refused. I told her it was inhumane. She told me if I did not do it, she would have me fired and blacklisted for incompetence. She forced me to dial back the drip. I felt a wave of nausea. They had tortured her. They had stripped away her pain relief to force her into consciousness. She was in agony. Mr. Ford, Maria sobbed. I heard her moaning. I heard Brett saying, "Just sign the paper, old woman, and the pain stops." They put the pen in her hand. I saw it through the crack in the door. Brett held her hand. He moved it for her. She did not sign that will. He used her hand like a puppet. And afterwards, Victoria came to the nurse's station. She told the doctor on call that her mother was suffering too much. She ordered them to stop all life-sustaining medication. Just comfort care, she said. But she made us cut the hydration too. She sped it up, Mr. Ford. She wanted it over. She wanted the payout. I closed my eyes, seeing Catherine's face in my mind. The woman who had built an empire with me, who had raised our daughter, who had laughed and loved and lived with such fire. She had died thirsty and in pain, betrayed by the very child she had given life to. "This ends now," I said, opening my eyes. "I am going to destroy them, Maria. But I need you. I need you to tell this to a judge." "I can't," she whispered. "They are watching me." Victoria has a private security guy parked in the lot. He follows me home. He sits outside my apartment. "Let him watch," I said, grabbing her hand. "You are coming with me. I will protect you. I have a lawyer who will eat that NDA for breakfast. But we have to go now." Maria looked at me, then she looked at the door. She squared her shoulders. "I kept the logs," she said. "The digital logs of the morphine drip, the ones they thought they deleted. I made a copy on my phone." "Good girl. Let's go." We slipped out of the closet and headed for the service exit. I kept my arm around her, guiding her, moving fast. We burst out onto the loading dock into the cool night air. My truck was 50 yards away. "Hey, you!" a voice boomed from the shadows. I turned. A large man in a dark suit was stepping out from behind a dumpster. He was holding a radio. It was Victoria's watchdog. "Nurse Rodriguez," the man said, reaching inside his jacket. "You are violating your contract. Step away from him." "Run," I told Maria. We sprinted toward the truck. The man lunged, but I was ready. I swung the heavy clipboard I was still holding and caught him square in the jaw. He stumbled back, cursing. It gave us the 3 seconds we needed. I threw Maria into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. The engine roared to life. As I threw it into reverse, I saw the man recovering, pulling a gun from his holster. "Get down!" I shouted, pushing Maria's head below the dashboard. He didn't shoot. Too much noise, too many witnesses in a high-end facility. Instead, he ran for a black sedan parked near the gate. I slammed the truck into drive and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. I checked the rearview mirror. The sedan was right behind us, its headlights blinding. "Hold on," I told Maria, gripping the wheel. We were not just running away. We were running toward the truth, and I was not going to let anyone stop us. Not a hired thug, not a corrupt daughter, and certainly not fear. I had the evidence. I had the witness, and I had a full tank of gas. The hunt was on. The woods around my cabin were pitch black. That was my advantage. I knew every root, every stone, and every shadow in these 5 acres. I pulled the truck into a hidden logging trail, about 100 yards behind the house, and killed the engine. Maria was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. I took her to the old root cellar, a reinforced concrete bunker I had built years ago for tornado season. It was dry and secure. I gave her a flashlight and a blanket and told her to lock the bolt from the inside and not to open it unless she heard my secret knock. 3 raps, then 2. I had about 20 minutes before they arrived. I did not waste a second. I was 70 years old, and I could not fight 4 men with my fists anymore, but I was a master builder. I knew physics, I knew leverage, and I knew how to make a construction site dangerous for the careless. I moved quickly, stringing high-tension fishing line across the main path at shin height. I rigged my industrial halogen work lights, the ones that could blind a pilot, to a motion sensor on the porch. I loosened the retaining pins on the stack of heavy timber logs near the driveway. I was not building a house tonight. I was building a fortress. I saw their headlights first. 3 vehicles cutting through the darkness like predators' eyes. They did not park at the edge this time. They drove right up onto the lawn, tearing up the grass I had tended for 20 years. Doors slammed. I counted 5 men. 4 of them were big, wearing leather jackets and holding baseball bats and crowbars. The 5th was Brett. He looked manic. His eyes were wild and he was sweating despite the cool night air. He was a man running out of time. A man with a $5 million debt breathing down his neck. "Garrison! Come out here, you old coward!" Brett screamed. His voice cracked. "I know you have the nurse. I know she is in there." I watched from the shadows of the tree line. I held my phone in my hand, the voice recorder app running. I needed him to say it. I needed him to hang himself. "Bring her out, Garrison," Brett yelled again, swinging a tire iron against the wooden railing of my porch. Splinters flew. "If you do not come out right now, I am going to have my friends here take this cabin apart piece by piece, and when we find her, it is not going to be pretty." I stepped out from behind the oak tree. I stayed in the dark, just beyond the reach of their headlights. "You are trespassing, Brett," I called out. "And you are threatening a witness. That is 2 felonies in under a minute. You are racking up quite a score." Brett spun around, trying to spot me. He signaled to the thugs. "Get him. He is over there by the trees. Break his legs." The 2 biggest men charged toward my voice. They were fast, but they were clumsy. They did not see the fishing line. The first one hit it at a full sprint. His feet went out from under him, and he hit the hard-packed earth with a sickening thud. The second one tried to stop, but he tripped over his fallen friend and went sprawling into the mud. I flipped the switch in my hand. The halogen lights mounted on the roof blazed to life, flooding the yard with 5,000 watts of blinding white light. The thugs screamed, covering their eyes. They were disoriented, blinded, and on the ground. "Stay down," I ordered, my voice booming. "You are on a job site now, boys. Hard hats required." Brett was squinting, shielding his eyes against the glare. He looked terrified, but his desperation made him reckless. He pulled a gun from his waistband, a small black pistol that looked shaking in his grip. "I am done playing games, Garrison," he shrieked, pointing the gun wildly at the cabin, then at the trees. "Sign the waiver. I have the papers right here. Sign over your rights to the inheritance. Sign over the land. Do it now, or I swear to God I will burn this place to the ground with that nurse inside." I stepped partially into the light, just enough for him to see my silhouette. I wanted him focused on me. "You would burn down a house with a woman inside?" I asked, calm and steady. "Is that what Catherine would have wanted? Is that how you honor her memory?" Brett laughed, a sound that was closer to a sob. "Shut up about Catherine," he yelled. "I do not care about her memory. I do not care about her legacy. I did what I had to do. You forced her to sign that codicil, Brett," I said, pushing him. "You tortured a dying woman. You think a judge is going to let you keep a dime when they find out?" "There will not be any judge," Brett shouted, stepping closer, his gun shaking. "Because you are going to sign these papers. And if you do not, I will finish what we started at the hospital." "So it does not matter what she really wanted?" I asked. "It does not matter if she left a real will?" "No," Brett screamed, his face twisted and ugly in the harsh light. "It does not matter. I do not care what the old hag Catherine wrote. I do not care if she left it all to the Pope. I will burn it. I will burn the will. I will burn the diary. I will burn this cabin, and I will burn you if you do not give me my money. Got you." I tapped the phone in my pocket. He had admitted it. Malice, intent, the disregard for her actual wishes. It was all there, recorded in high-definition audio. "You are finished, Brett," I said. He raised the gun, aiming directly at my chest. I braced myself. I was ready to dive. But suddenly sirens wailed in the distance, loud and getting closer fast. The thugs on the ground scrambled up, Cops, one of them yelled. Let's go, we are not getting paid enough for this. They ran for the cars, leaving their bats in the mud. Brett looked at the approaching lights, then at me. He looked like he wanted to pull the trigger. He wanted to end it right there. But he was a coward. Calm. He always had been. This is not over, Garrison, he spat, lowering the gun. You are dead. You hear me? You are a dead man. He ran to his SUV and peeled out just as the first police cruiser turned onto the main road. I watched them go, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body, leaving my knees weak. I walked to the porch and turned off the blinding lights. The silence of the woods rushed back in, filling the space where the violence had been. I went to the root cellar and knocked 3 times, then 2. Maria opened the door, her face pale in the flashlight beam. Is it over? She whispered. For tonight, I said, helping her out. But the real fight is just starting. I pulled the phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. I played back the last 10 seconds. I do not care what the old hag Catherine wrote. I will burn it. I looked at Maria. We have the diary. We have the nurse. And now we have the confession. Tomorrow we go to the archives. We are going to find the Blue Sky file. And then we are going to walk into that boardroom and drop a bomb that will blow their whole world apart. Get some rest, Maria. Tomorrow we end this. The city archives building smelled like dead time. It was a scent of dust, decaying paper, and dry rot that I recognized from tearing down old libraries to build condos. It was the smell of things people wanted to forget. Arthur Harrison looked out of place here in his 3-piece suit, his polished shoes tapping nervously on the concrete floor. We were in the basement level, surrounded by rows of metal shelving that stretched into the darkness. This was where the city kept the records that had not been digitized, the paper trails that existed before computers took over and made it easy for people like my daughter to delete history with a single click. We had been searching for 3 hours. My back was aching, and the dust was coating my throat, but I did not stop. I knew it was here. Catherine was meticulous. She never threw away a receipt, let alone a document that secured the future of our empire. Row 42. Arthur called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Shelf B. This should be the corporate filings from 1985. I walked over to him. He was pointing at a stack of cardboard banker's boxes that looked like they had not been touched in decades. I pulled the top one down. It was heavy, filled with the weight of the past. I set it on a metal table and used my pocket knife to slice the packing tape. It was brittle and yellowed, peeling away like dead skin. Inside were manila folders packed tight. I started flipping through them. Ford Construction, Ford Development, permit applications, tax returns. It was the story of our lives told in receipts and carbon copies. Then I saw it. A blue folder thicker than the rest, tucked all the way at the back. It did not have a label typed by a secretary. It had handwriting in black ink. Catherine's handwriting. Project Blue Sky. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I opened it, and there it was. The original deed of trust, dated October 12th, 1985. The paper was heavy bond, high-quality cotton that had barely aged. Arthur, come look at this, I said. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over my shoulder, reading the legal jargon that I had helped write 40 years ago, but had almost forgotten. My God, Arthur whispered. It is irrevocable. He flipped the pages, scanning the clauses with his lawyer's eye. Garrison, do you understand what this is? This is not just a trust. It is an asset protection vehicle. You and Catherine placed the controlling shares of Ford Enterprises into this trust before the company went public. I nodded. We did it to protect the company from liability lawsuits. Construction is a dangerous business. We did not want one accident to bankrupt our family. Arthur tapped a paragraph on page 7. Look at this. Article 4, Section 2, the Survivor Clause. In the event of the death or incapacitation of one trustee, the surviving trustee shall assume sole and absolute authority over all trust assets regardless of marital status or subsequent legal separations, unless the trust is formally dissolved by mutual written consent. He looked at me, his eyes wide. Did you ever sign a dissolution document, Garrison? When you divorced? No, I said. We signed a settlement agreement. I gave her the houses, the cars, the cash accounts. But we never dissolved the trust. We just forgot about it. Or at least I did. Catherine kept it active. That means, Arthur said, his voice rising with excitement. That means legally you never lost control. The divorce settlement divided personal property. But the company, the $150 million in assets, they belong to the trust. And you are the sole surviving trustee. You do not just inherit it, Garrison. You are already in charge of it. You have been for 20 years. I felt a weight lift off my chest, a weight I had been carrying since the funeral. I was not a beggar at the gate. I was the king of the castle. I just had not checked my pockets for the keys. But wait, Arthur said, frowning. He pulled out his tablet and started tapping furiously, accessing the current state records. This does not make sense. According to the digital registry, Victoria is listed as the primary beneficiary of a revised trust filed in 2005. He showed me the screen. There it was. A digital document dated 5 years after our divorce. She forged it, I said. How do you know? Because in 2005, Catherine was in Europe on a sabbatical, I said, pointing to the date. She was in Paris. I remember because she sent me a postcard. She could not have signed this document in Chicago in front of a notary. Arthur looked closer at the digital file. You are right. And look at the notary stamp. That commission number, it belongs to a man who was disbarred in 2003 for fraud. Victoria didn't just hide the trust. She created a fake paper trail to bury it. That is a federal crime, Garrison. That is felony fraud. I looked at the blue folder. We had the smoking gun. We had the proof that Victoria had stolen the company long before her mother died. But there was one more thing. I turned to the last page of the document. The morality clause. I remembered writing this part. We were young idealists then. We wanted our money to do good. Any beneficiary acting in a manner that brings disrepute to the family name or demonstrates malicious intent toward the founders or other beneficiaries shall be immediately disqualified from receiving any distribution from the trust. I thought about the recording on my phone. Brett threatening to burn down my house with Maria inside. Victoria ordering the nurses to starve her mother. Malicious intent, I said aloud, reading the words. Arthur looked at me. You have them, Garrison. Between the forgery and the audio recording of Brett's threats, they have violated every condition of this document. You have the power to cut them off completely. Not a penny. I closed the folder. The sound was final, like a judge's gavel. I stood there in the dusty basement, feeling the shift in the universe. For days I had been reacting. I had been running, hiding, and defending. Now I was attacking. Victoria thought she was playing chess, but she did not realize she was playing on a board I had built. Arthur, I said, we are going to make copies of this, certified copies. And then we are going to hide the original in your personal vault. And then I am going to make a phone call. We walked out of the archives into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. The city looked different to me now. It was no longer a place where I was invisible. It was my town. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Victoria's name. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. This was it. The point of no return. I dialed. It rang 4 times before she answered. What do you want, Dad? She snapped. Her voice was brittle, edgy. I could hear the stress in it. She was probably wondering if her thugs had succeeded in burning down my house. "I am done fighting, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice low and defeated. There was a pause, a hopeful silence on the other end. "What does that mean?" she asked suspiciously. "It means you win." "I am tired. I cannot fight your lawyers. I cannot fight Brett's friends. I just want peace." "Really?" she said, and I could hear the triumphant smile in her voice. "Finally, you are making sense." "I want to meet," I said. "Tomorrow, at the office. I want to sign the waivers. I want to sign over the land. Everything. Just promise me you will leave me alone after this." "Of course, Dad," she said, her voice turning sickeningly sweet. "That is all we ever wanted. Just to settle this and move on. Bring the papers. We will have the notary ready." "I will be there at 10, I said. "Don't be late," she said, and hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at Arthur. He was smiling a grim, satisfied smile. "She took the bait," Arthur said. "Hook, line, and sinker," I replied. "She thinks I am coming to surrender. She thinks she is going to walk out of that room with the deed to my land and clear title to a fortune. She has no idea that I am not bringing a white flag. I am bringing an eviction notice." I got into my truck, the engine rumbling to life. I felt lighter than I had in years. Catherine was right. The foundation had cracked, but the patch was holding. Tomorrow we were going to pour the concrete over their greed and seal it shut forever. "Let's go, Arthur," I said. "We have a funeral to prepare for. But this time it is not for a person. It is for a lie." The night before the final confrontation was heavy with a silence that felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat at my kitchen table, the wood scarred and stained from years of meals eaten alone. The certified copies of the trust documents were packed in my bag by the door. The original was safe with Arthur. I had cleaned the mud from the floor where Brett's thugs had fallen, and I had boarded up the window they cracked. My cabin was wounded, but it was still standing just like me. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, my hands steady for the first time in days. I was ready, or at least I thought I was. Then the phone rang. It was a private number. I knew who it was before I answered. Victoria. She was not calling to negotiate this time. I could tell by the way she breathed on the other end, a sharp, jagged intake of air that sounded like a serrated blade. "I know you found Maria," she said without preamble. Her voice was ice-cold, devoid of the panic she had shown earlier. "My security team reviewed the footage from the nursing home. You think you are clever, Dad, sneaking around like a common thief. But you made a mistake. You think Maria's testimony matters. You think a few records about morphine drips will stop me. It will stop you from inheriting a dime, Victoria," I said calmly. "It will put you in prison." Victoria laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You really do not get it, do you? You think this is about laws and courts. This is about blood. And here is the funny part, Garrison. We do not share any." I froze the coffee cup hovering halfway to my mouth. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about biology," she hissed. "Did you really think a woman like Mom stayed with a man like you out of love? A man who smelled like sawdust and sweat while she was building an empire. She stayed out of pity, Garrison. She stayed because she needed a father figure for her mistake." "She is lying," I told myself. "She is desperate. She is trying to hurt you because she has no other cards left to play." "Ask yourself why I don't look like you," she continued, her voice drilling into my ear like a worm. "Ask yourself why Mom was always so distant in '82. That was the year she spent 3 months in New York, remember? The consulting job. She wasn't just consulting Garrison. She was with a real man, a developer who actually owned the buildings instead of just hammering the nails. I am his daughter, not yours." The room seemed to tilt. 1982. Catherine had gone to New York. She had come back different, quieter. I had assumed it was the stress of the business. Mom told me everything on her deathbed. Victoria lied smoothly. She wanted me to know the truth. She wanted me to know that I do not owe you a thing. You are just the hired help that never left. So go ahead. Bring your little nurse to court. Drag our name through the mud. I will demand a DNA test. And when the world finds out you are nothing to me, you will not just lose the case. You will lose the only thing you have left, your identity as a father. She hung up, leaving me sitting in the silence of my cabin, with the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a hornet. I put the phone down on the table. My hands were shaking again. Not from fear, but from a sudden crushing doubt. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Did she look like me? Victoria had Catherine's eyes, but her chin was sharper, her temperament more volatile. I tried to remember 1982. I tried to remember Catherine's face when she came back from New York. Was there guilt there? Was there a secret she had carried for 40 years? The pain was physical, a dull ache in the center of my chest. If I wasn't her father, then what was this all for? Why was I fighting? Why was I risking my life and my home for a woman who might not even be my blood? If Victoria was right, then I really was just a stranger intruding on a family that wasn't mine. I stood up and walked to the leather satchel I had taken from the wall safe in the manor. I pulled out the diary. The leather was soft, worn smooth by Catherine's hands. I had been afraid to read it before, afraid of invading her privacy, even in death. But now I needed the truth. I needed to hear her voice one last time. I sat under the lamp and opened the book. The pages smelled of lavender and old paper. I flipped past the early years, past the struggles of building the business. I went to the end. The entries from the last few years when the sickness had started to take hold, but her mind was still sharp. October 14th, I read. Victoria came by today. She did not stay long. She only wanted to know about the accounts. It breaks my heart to see what she has become. She is so cold, so hungry for things she did not earn. I look at her and I wonder where we went wrong. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the elegant cursive script. November 2nd. Garrison tried to visit again. The nurses told me he was outside, but Victoria has banned him. I miss him so much. He is the only true thing in my life. The only man who ever loved me for me, and not for the Ford name. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. She had loved me. That part was real. But what about Victoria? I flipped back, searching for the truth about 1982. I found an entry from years later, a reflection on our daughter's 18th birthday. Victoria is leaving for college tomorrow. She is so headstrong, so full of fire. She reminds me of Garrison when we were starting out. She has his stubbornness, his refusal to quit. I only hope she finds his heart. I fear I have spoiled her too much trying to give her the childhood Garrison, and I never had. I wanted her to have everything, and in doing so, I may have taken away her character. God forgive me for ruining her with ease. She has his stubbornness. I closed the book. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Catherine had not lied. Victoria was my daughter. She had my stubbornness, my fire, even if it was twisted into greed. The trip to New York, the secret affair, it was all a fabrication, a desperate lie spun by a cornered animal trying to bite the hand that was closing the trap. But as I sat there tracing the gold lettering on the diary cover, I realized something else, something more important than DNA. It did not matter. Even if Victoria had been right, even if another man had fathered her, it would not change a damn thing. I was the one who walked the floor with her when she had colic. I was the one who taught her to ride a bike. I was the one who sat in the front row of every school play while Catherine was in meetings. I was the one who bandaged her knees and dried her tears. I was her father. Biology is an accident, but fatherhood is a choice. I had chosen her every day for 38 years, and because I was her father, I had a responsibility. A father does not just provide. A father corrects. A father teaches. And when a child loses their way so completely that they become a danger to themselves and others, a father has to step in and stop them. I had failed to discipline her when she was young. Catherine had written it herself. We ruined her with ease. We gave her the fruit without teaching her how to plant the tree. Now she was a monster of our own making. She was willing to starve her mother and burn down her father's house for money. She was broken, and I was the only one left who could fix her. Not with money, not with forgiveness, but with consequences. The doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The pain in my chest was gone. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I picked up the phone and typed a message to Arthur. She tried to break me, Arthur. She failed. Have the papers ready. We are not just taking the company back. We are taking her down. I put the diary back in the satchel along with the trust documents and the tape recorder. I looked around my small cabin, the home I had built with my own hands. Tomorrow, I was leaving it behind. I was walking back into the world of skyscrapers and sharks. But I was not going as a victim. I was going as a father who had one last lesson to teach. And this one was going to hurt. The elevator ride to the top floor of the Harrison building was silent. I stood in the back corner watching the numbers climb, feeling the weight of the canvas bag against my leg. Inside were the certified copies of the trust, the diary, the tape recorder, and the blue folder labeled Project Blue Sky. It was everything I needed to end this war. Arthur stood beside me, his face grim. He knew who was waiting for us. The boardroom was already full when we entered. Victoria had not come alone. She had brought a shark. He was a man in his 30s, with a suit that cost more than my truck, and a smile that showed too many teeth. He was pacing the length of the room talking to the 5 men and women seated around the massive oval table. These were the trustees. The Grey Guard, as Catherine used to call them. Judge Sterling, Martha Vance, Colonel Higgins, and the others. They were old friends, people we had known since the beginning. Victoria clearly thought they were senile relics of a bygone era she could manipulate or ignore. She did not realize that Judge Sterling had put away mob bosses in the 80s, or that Martha had managed the city pension fund with an iron fist for 30 years. They looked frail, yes, but I knew better. They were sleeping dragons. Victoria stopped pacing when I walked in. She was dressed for battle in a sharp white suit, her hair pulled back tight. She looked at me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "You actually came," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I thought you might have had the good sense to stay in the woods, Dad. This is not going to be pretty." I ignored her. I nodded to the trustees. Judge Sterling tipped his head slightly, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Let's get this over with," Arthur said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Not so fast," the shark lawyer interjected. He slammed his briefcase onto the table. "I am Attorney Reynolds representing Ms. Victoria Ford Grant. We are filing an emergency motion to remove Arthur Harrison as executor and to dissolve this sham of a trust immediately." "On what grounds?" Arthur asked calmly. "Gross negligence, conspiracy to defraud, and moral turpitude on the part of the primary trustee," Reynolds said, pointing a finger at me. "We have evidence that Garrison Ford is unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a $150 million estate." Victoria stepped forward. She took a deep breath, and the transformation was instant. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes filled with tears. Her lower lip trembled. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "I did not want to do this," she sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly. "I wanted to protect my father's reputation. I wanted to keep this private. But he has forced my hand. He is trying to steal my mother's legacy, and I cannot let him do that. Not after what he did to her." She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a stack of photographs. She threw them onto the table, fanning them out so everyone could see. The trustees leaned in. I saw Martha gasp. Colonel Higgins frowned, his face darkening. The photos were horrifying. They showed Catherine with bruises on her arms, looking gaunt and terrified. There were medical reports, clearly forged or taken out of context, detailing trauma. He hit her. Victoria cried, tears streaming down her face. For years. That is why they divorced. That is why he lives in the woods like a hermit. He is violent. He is unstable. Mom was terrified of him. In her last days, she told me he threatened to kill her if she did not sign over the company. That is why she wrote the codicil. She was trying to protect me from him. A murmur went around the room. I saw the doubt creeping into the eyes of my old friends. They had not seen me in years. They saw a man in work boots and a flannel shirt, rough and weathered, standing across from a grieving daughter. The narrative fit. The angry, estranged ex-husband coming back for the money. He is a monster, Victoria wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. He tormented her. And now he is working with Arthur to fabricate documents to steal the only thing she had left to give me. Please, you have to stop him. You have to honor my mother. Reynolds stepped in for the kill. Under the bylaws of any charitable trust, moral turpitude is grounds for immediate disqualification. Domestic abuse certainly qualifies. We demand that Garrison Ford be removed immediately and control of the assets be turned over to the sole beneficiary, Victoria Ford Grant. The room fell silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Judge Sterling looked at me, his expression unreadable. Garrison, the judge, said slowly, his voice raspy, "These are serious accusations. Do you have anything to say?" Victoria smirked through her tears. She thought she had me. She thought I would explode. She thought I would scream and shout and prove her point that I was an unstable, violent old man. She was waiting for the outburst. I stood up slowly. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. I looked at the photos on the table. I looked at the shark lawyer who was checking his watch. And then I looked at my daughter. I did not see the monster she was trying to paint me as. I saw the little girl who used to steal cookies. I saw the teenager who crashed her car and lied about it. I saw the woman who starved her mother. I did not defend myself. I did not deny the photos. I did not scream. I just reached into my heavy canvas bag and pulled out the thick blue folder we had retrieved from the archives. I placed it gently in the center of the table, right on top of her lies. "Open Blueprint 1. I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 50 years of concrete and steel. Victoria frowned. "What is this, another fake?" Judge Sterling reached out his hand, shaking slightly, and opened the folder. He saw the date. 1985. He saw the signatures. Mine and Catherine's. He looked up at me and a slow recognition dawned in his eyes. This is the original charter," he whispered. "Read Article 7, Victoria." I said, my eyes never leaving hers. "Read the morality clause." Victoria froze. The shark lawyer tried to grab the folder, but Judge Sterling slapped his hand away. "I will read it," the judge said, his voice gaining strength. "Any beneficiary acting in a manner that brings disrepute to the family name or demonstrates malicious intent toward the founders." He stopped. He looked at Victoria, then at the photos she had thrown on the table. "Shall be immediately disqualified." Victoria's face went white. She realized too late that she had just walked into a room full of people who knew how to read a blueprint. And she realized that by trying to frame me, she had just provided the final brick in the wall that was about to crush her. I sat back down. The trial was over. The execution was about to begin. Arthur Harrison stood up and walked to the wall behind his chair, where a small, inconspicuous panel blended perfectly with the oak wainscoting. He punched a code into a keypad I had not even noticed until that moment, and with a pneumatic hiss, the panel slid aside, revealing a steel safe. It was not large, but it looked impenetrable. He spun the dial with the precision of a safecracker. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Victoria seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. The heavy door swung open, and Arthur reached inside, pulling out a thick, bound document that looked identical to the one I had placed on the table, but this one bore the raised crimson seal of the Supreme Court, dated 1985. He placed it in front of the shark lawyer Reynolds, who was looking at it as if it were a live grenade. "You are operating under a fundamental misconception, Mr. Reynolds," Arthur said, his voice calm and terrifyingly professional. "You are assuming that the $150 million in assets belonged to Catherine Ford personally. You are assuming they were hers to give away in a will or a handwritten note." Arthur paused, looking at Victoria over the rim of his glasses. "They were not." Victoria scoffed, her voice shaky but defiant. "Of course they were hers. She was the CEO. Her name was on the building. She was the manager of the trust," Arthur corrected. "But she did not own the assets. In 1985, Garrison and Catherine Ford transferred complete ownership of Ford Enterprises and all future acquisitions into the Blue Sky Irrevocable Trust. The terms state clearly that the assets do not pass through probate. They do not pass through a will. Upon the death of one trustee, the entire corpus of the trust remains under the sole authority of the surviving trustee." He pointed a finger at me. "Garrison Ford never ceased to be the trustee. The divorce settlement handled personal cash and the marital home, but the company remained in the trust. Catherine knew this. That is why she never wrote a formal will dispersing the company shares. She knew she could not. She only managed them on behalf of the trust." Reynolds, the shark lawyer, was flipping through the pages frantically. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He was looking for a loophole, a missing signature, a date that did not match. He found nothing. The document was ironclad. I had built it that way. I built legal structures the same way I built bridges, to last forever. "So you see, Victoria," I said, speaking for the first time since I opened the folder. "That piece of paper you forced your mother to sign is worthless. It is like writing a will giving away the Brooklyn Bridge. You cannot give away what you do not own." Victoria stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The reality was crashing down on her. The millions she had already spent in her head, the power she thought she wielded, it was all smoke. "But that is not the worst part," Arthur continued. "Even if the trust allowed for beneficiaries, the morality clause that Judge Sterling just read is quite specific. Malicious intent. Actions that bring disrepute to the family." Victoria laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Malicious intent. You have no proof. You have the word of a senile old man and some disgruntled nurse. That is hearsay. It will never stand up in court." I reached into my pocket. I did not look at her. I looked at the center of the table where the polished wood reflected the overhead lights. I pulled out the small digital recorder I had taken from the library and the one I had used at the cabin. I placed them side by side next to the blue folder. "This is not hearsay, Victoria," I said. "This is history." I pressed play on the first device. The sound quality was crystal clear thanks to the high-end equipment Catherine had used. Maria's voice filled the boardroom, trembling but distinct, followed by the sound of Victoria screaming. "Sign the paper, old woman, and the pain stops." The trustees gasped. Martha covered her mouth with her hand. Colonel Higgins looked like he was about to be sick. The audio continued. The sound of Catherine moaning in pain, the sound of Victoria ordering the nurse to cut the morphine, the sound of a daughter torturing her mother for a signature. Victoria's face turned the color of ash. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "That is fake," she shrieked. "That is manipulated. You used AI. You made that up." I did not answer. I simply pressed play on the second device. This one was different. It was the sound of wind in the trees and the crunch of boots on gravel, followed by Brett's voice, loud and unhinged. I do not care what the old hag Catherine wrote. I do not care if she left it all to the Pope. I will burn it. I will burn the will. I will burn the diary. I will burn this cabin, and I will burn you if you do not give me my money. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. Reynolds, the lawyer, slowly closed the blue folder. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at the trustees. He picked up his briefcase and clicked the latches shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mr. Reynolds, Victoria stammered, reaching out to grab his sleeve. Do something. Object. Tell them it is inadmissible. Reynolds pulled his arm away as if she were contagious. He looked at me, then at Judge Sterling. I was not informed of these particulars, he said, his voice flat. I was told this was a standard probate dispute. I do not represent clients who engage in extortion, elder abuse, or criminal conspiracy. But you are my lawyer, Victoria screamed. I paid you. Your retainer will be returned minus my hours, Reynolds said. He turned to me and nodded once, a gesture of respect from one predator to another who realizes he has been outmatched. Good day, Mr. Ford. Gentlemen. He walked out of the room, not looking back. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Victoria alone, completely and utterly alone. She looked around the table. The trustees. The people she had dismissed as old and irrelevant were looking at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. She looked at Brett's empty chair. Even her husband was not there to hold her hand. She looked at me. And for the first time in her life, I saw her truly afraid. The mask of arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a frightened child who had broken something she could not fix. Daddy, she whispered, her voice small and broken. Do not call me that, I said. My voice was not angry. It was just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the fighting, tired of the disappointment. You lost the right to call me that when you tortured the woman I loved. You lost the right to this family when you tried to erase us. I stood up. The trustees stood with me. It was a wall of gray suits and hard faces, a wall she could not climb. The trust has a provision for this, I said, looking down at the blue folder. It is called the Disinheritance Protocol. It strips you of everything. No stock, no cash, no property. The house you are living in. It belongs to the trust. The car you drove here in. It belongs to the trust. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Victoria slid out of her chair, sinking to the floor. She was sobbing now, ugly raw sounds of total defeat. But I have nothing, she wailed. I have debt. Brett owes money to bad people. They will kill us. That sounds like a problem for Brett, I said. I turned my back on her. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline, the buildings I had helped build. The storm had passed. The sky was clearing. It was blue, just like the project. Arthur walked up beside me. What now, Garrison? He asked quietly. Now, I said, watching the traffic far below. Now we finish it. Call the police, Arthur. Tell them we have a confession for the death of Catherine Ford, and tell them to bring handcuffs. The heavy oak doors swung open again, crashing against the wall with a violence that made the crystal water pitchers rattle. Brett strode into the room, a grin plastered across his face like he had just won the lottery. He was holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and 2 glasses in the other, oblivious to the devastation that had just occurred. Did he sign it, babe? Brett called out, not even looking at the room yet. Reynolds texted me, said he had them on the ropes. I told the valet to bring the Porsche around front. We are celebrating in style tonight. He stopped. The smile slid off his face like wet clay. He saw the empty chair where Reynolds had been. He saw the trustees staring at him with stone-cold expressions. And then he saw his wife, his partner in crime, crumpled on the floor, at my feet, sobbing into the carpet. "What is going on?" Brett stammered, the champagne bottle slipping from his fingers and bouncing on the thick rug with a dull thud. "Where is the lawyer?" Victoria looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks, making her look like a broken doll. When she saw Brett, her expression shifted from despair to a feral, desperate rage. She scrambled to her feet, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. It was him, she screamed, her voice cracking. It was all him, Dad. I didn't want to do it. Brett made me. He owes money to the mob. He said they would kill us if we didn't get the inheritance. He forced me to sign those papers. He forced me to cut Mom's meds. Brett took a step back, his eyes going wide with shock. "You lying witch," he shouted. "You came up with the plan. You said your mother was taking too long to die. You said you needed the money for your image, for your parties. Don't you dare pin this on me." I watched them turn on each other like rats in a barrel. It was pathetic. It was the final proof that there was no love between them, no loyalty, only a shared greed that had finally run dry. "You threatened to burn down the cabin," Victoria yelled, hysterical now. "You hired those thugs. Dad, I had nothing to do with that. I told him not to hurt you. I love you, Dad. Please, you have to believe me." Brett lunged at her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You love him. You called him a useless old fossil every day for 5 years. You couldn't wait for him to die so we could sell his land for a parking lot. Tell him the truth, Victoria. Tell him how much you hate him." "Enough." My voice was not a shout, but it stopped them cold. It was the voice I used to command construction crews when a crane was swinging a ton of steel overhead. Absolute. Final. I walked around the table. I did not look at Brett. I did not look at Victoria. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. Catherine's chair. "You want to talk about truth," I said quietly. "Let's talk about the truth." I picked up a thin red folder that Arthur had placed next to the blue sky documents. It was different from the others. It was not a legal trust document. It was a forensic accounting report. "You thought your mother was weak, Victoria. You thought the cancer had made her soft. You forgot that she was the CFO of this company for 30 years. She could spot a missing penny in a ledger from a mile away." I opened the folder. "Catherine knew you were stealing from her," I said. "For the last 5 years, while you were playing the devoted daughter, you were siphoning funds from the corporate expense accounts. The renovations on your house, the cars, the vacations, you billed them all to the company as consulting fees." Victoria went pale. She shook her head, mute. She tracked every dollar. I continued running my finger down the columns of numbers. "She let you do it. Do you know why? Because she wanted to see how far you would go. She wanted to see if there was a bottom to your greed. She died knowing there wasn't." I pulled out a document from the folder. It was a promissory note, drafted by Catherine before she died, but never executed until this moment. "The trust has a special clause for debts owed to the estate," I said. "Since you are disinherited from the assets, you are still liable for the debts." Catherine kept a running tally. She called it the character tax. I slid the paper across the table toward them. $2,400,000. That is the principal plus interest plus penalties for embezzlement. That is what you stole. And that is what you owe the trust, effective immediately." Brett looked at the number and let out a strangled noise. "We don't have $2 million. We don't have $2,000. "Then I suggest you start selling things," I said coldly. "But you won't be selling them to pay me. You will be selling them to pay the IRS because Catherine also forwarded these records to the tax authorities before she passed. You haven't paid taxes on any of that stolen income." Victoria fell back to the floor, her legs giving out. It was too much. The loss of the fortune was one thing, But the debt, the massive crushing debt, was a death sentence for her lifestyle. "Please," she whispered. "Dad, please. I'm your daughter." I looked down at her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound sadness. "My daughter died a long time ago, Victoria. She died the day she decided money was worth more than her mother's life." Suddenly, the double doors opened again. This time it wasn't a lawyer or a family member. It was a team of 4 men in dark windbreakers with gold badges on their belts. Behind them were 2 uniformed officers. Brett spun around looking for an exit, but the room had no other doors. He backed up against the window looking like he might try to jump. "Brett Grant and Victoria Ford Grant," the lead detective said, stepping into the room. He held up a warrant. "We have orders for your arrest." "What for?" Brett squeaked, his voice an octave higher than normal. "Extortion, attempted arson, trespass, and conspiracy to commit fraud," the detective listed off. "And thanks to some new evidence provided this morning, elder abuse and negligent homicide." Victoria screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of a trapped animal. She tried to crawl under the heavy table, but a female officer moved in fast, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. "No, no, you can't do this. I am Victoria Ford. I own this building," she shrieked, kicking and flailing. "You own nothing," I said, turning away. They cuffed her. The metal click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent boardroom. They dragged her toward the door, past the chair she had sat in so arrogantly just an hour ago. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, pleading for me to save her, to be the daddy who fixed everything. I stood still. I did not look away. I owed it to her to watch. This was the lesson. This was the consequence she had never faced. Brett was crying openly now, snot running down his face as an officer shoved him against the wall to frisk him. He was blubbering about Rocco, about the money, about how it wasn't his fault. He was a small man, a weak man, and he was about to be eaten alive by the system he thought he could outsmart. As they hauled them out, Victoria shouted one last time. "I hate you," she screamed. "I hate you." "I know," I said softly to the empty room. "I know." The doors closed. The shouting faded down the hallway. The boardroom was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the city outside and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We stood there, 2 old men who had built a world and watched it almost get destroyed by the people we built it for. "Is it done?" I asked. "It is done," Arthur said. "The trust is secure. The assets are locked. They can't touch a dime. And with those charges, they won't be seeing the outside of a cell for a very long time." I nodded. I walked to the table and picked up the blue folder. Project Blue Sky. It had saved us. Catherine had saved us. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. "You were right, Catherine," I whispered. The foundation held. I turned to Arthur. "Call the contractors," I said. "What for?" Arthur asked, surprised. "We have a house to renovate," I said. "I am selling the manor. I am selling the cars. I am liquidating everything Victoria touched. We are going to wipe the slate clean. And the money." "The money goes to the foundation," I said. "Every cent. We are going to build homes for people who actually need them. People who know the value of a roof over their heads." I picked up my canvas bag. It felt lighter now. "Let's go, Arthur. I have a cabin to fix, and I think I am going to finally buy that new truck. The old one has earned a rest." I walked out of the skyscraper and back into the rain. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had my name. I had my honor. And for the first time in 20 years, I had peace. 1 month later, I stood on the porch of my cabin. The morning mist was lifting off the trees, revealing the land that Brett had tried to steal. It was still there. The trees were still standing. The birds were singing. The survey stakes were gone, pulled up and thrown into the fire pit where they belonged. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, the cleanest smell in the world. I took a sip of coffee from my old ceramic mug, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. It had been a busy 30 days, the kind of busy that leaves you exhausted but satisfied. Selling Ford Enterprises was not a simple task. It was a behemoth, a creature of steel and glass that Catherine and I had fed for 40 years. But when I signed the final papers transferring ownership to a consortium of green developers who promised to keep the workers employed, I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt relief. It was like putting down a heavy stone I had carried for too long. $150 million. That was the final tally. It was a number so large it felt abstract, like the distance to the moon. People asked me what I was going to buy. A yacht, a private island, a new life. They did not understand. I already had the life I wanted. I had my cabin, I had my truck, I had my peace. So I did the only thing that made sense. I gave it away. All of it. I established the Catherine and Garrison Ford Foundation. Its mission was simple: to build affordable, high-quality housing for families who had been priced out of the city we helped build. We were not just going to write checks. We were going to build communities, neighborhoods with playgrounds and schools and foundations that would not crack. It was the legacy Catherine deserved. It was the patch she had wanted all along. I heard the sound of a car coming up the driveway. It was not a black SUV this time. It was a sensible sedan. Maria stepped out holding the hand of a little boy about 7 years old. His name was Leo. He had big, curious eyes, and he was looking at the woods like he had just discovered a new planet. Maria smiled when she saw me. She looked different, too. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was the new director of outreach for the foundation. She would find the families who needed us most. And she would never have to be afraid of losing her job for doing the right thing ever again. "Mr. Ford," she said, walking up the steps. "The lawyers sent the final confirmation. The scholarship fund is active." I looked at Leo, who was busy inspecting a pine cone. "Good," I said. "That boy is going to go to college, Maria. He is going to be an engineer or a doctor or whatever he wants to be. And he is going to do it without owing a dime to anyone." "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You have given us a life I never dreamed of." I shook my head. "You gave me the truth, Maria. You gave me the chance to fight. That is worth more than money." We stood there for a moment, watching Leo run toward the tree line. He was laughing, a pure, unburdened sound that echoed through the woods. I thought about Victoria. She was in a cell now, awaiting trial. The news said she was adjusting poorly. She was still trying to order the guards around, still trying to spend currency she no longer had. It would be a long road for her, maybe the hardest road of her life. But for the first time, she was walking it alone, without a safety net, without a checkbook to smooth out the bumps. "Money is like concrete," I said softly, more to myself than to Maria. "It can build skyscrapers that touch the clouds. It can bridge rivers. It can create wonders. But if you pour it without rebar, without the steel reinforcement of character and ethics, it becomes brittle. It cracks under pressure. And eventually it collapses, crushing the very people who tried to stand on it." I looked at my hands, calloused and scarred. Hands that had built walls and torn them down. I did not leave my daughter a fortune. I continued. I left her something more valuable. I left her a consequence. I left her the opportunity to find out who she is when the world stops bowing to her wallet. It is a harsh lesson. It is a painful lesson. But it is the only one that might save her soul, and that is the most expensive gift a father can give. I walked down the steps and picked up a stick, throwing it for Leo. He chased it, his laughter mixing with the wind. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling with a familiar comforting growl. I had a foundation meeting at noon. I had blueprints to review. I had a new generation to build for. The rearview mirror reflected the cabin, the woods, and the people who were now my family. I did not look back with regret. I looked forward. The road was clear. The sky was blue. And for the first time in a long time, the foundation was solid. The seasons changed quickly in the mountains, turning the green canopy of my woods into a blazing tapestry of red and gold. It was the first autumn in years that I did not dread the coming winter. The cabin was sealed tight. The woodpile was high, and for the first time I was not worrying about whether I could afford heating oil. But there was one piece of unfinished business that gnawed at me like a splinter I could not quite reach. I had to see her. I had to see Victoria. The drive to the state correctional facility was long and gray. It was a stark contrast to the warmth of my cabin. The prison sat in the middle of a barren field surrounded by fences topped with razor wire that glinted in the pale sunlight. It was a place designed to strip away pretense, a place where a last name like Ford meant absolutely nothing. I went through the security checkpoints, surrendering my keys, my phone, and my belt. I sat in the visitation room on a cold metal stool, waiting. When they brought Victoria out, I almost did not recognize her. The designer suits were replaced by a shapeless gray jumpsuit. Her hair, once dyed and styled to perfection, was pulled back in a severe bun, revealing the gray roots she had fought so hard to hide. She looked smaller. Without the armor of her wealth, she looked fragile. She sat down on the other side of the thick glass and picked up the phone. Her hands were rough, chapped from prison labor. "You look old, Dad," she said. It was not an insult this time, just an observation. Her voice was flat, drained of the venom that used to fuel it. "You look tired, Victoria," I replied. "I am tired," she said, leaning her forehead against the glass. "I work in the laundry. 8 hours a day folding sheets. My hands bleed. The other women, they do not care who I was. They only care if I pull my weight." "Good," I said. "That is the first honest work you have done in your life." She flinched, but she did not fight back. The old Victoria would have screamed. This Victoria just sighed. "I hate you for putting me here," she whispered. "But I think I hate Brett more. He sent me a letter. He is trying to cut a deal. He is trying to say I masterminded the whole thing. Can you believe that? After everything I gave him. He is a survivor, Victoria. Rats always try to swim when the ship goes down. You should have known that." "I know now," she said. She looked at me, her eyes searching for something. A hint of a bailout maybe, or perhaps just a shred of pity. "Are you going to help me with the appeal?" "No," I said, firm but not cruel. "You committed the crimes, Victoria. You have to do the time. But I deposited money in your commissary account. Enough for phone calls and toiletries. Not enough to buy influence. Just enough to be human." She looked down at her hands. "Why?" "Because you are still my daughter," I said. "And because I promised your mother I would try to save you. This is the only way I know how. By letting you hit the bottom, so you can finally find a solid place to stand." We sat in silence for a long time. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people looking at the wreckage of a car crash and realizing they both survived. When the guard signaled that time was up, Victoria stood. She placed her hand on the glass. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "The laundry. I am actually good at it. I organized the shift schedule last week. The supervisor said I have a knack for logistics." I smiled a genuine small smile. "You have your mother's brain, Victoria. Use it for something good." I watched her walk back through the heavy steel doors. She did not look back. She walked with a little more strength than when she entered. It was a small step, but it was a start. I drove back to the cabin feeling a strange sense of closure. The wound was still there, but it was starting to heal. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Leo sitting on the porch steps waiting for me. He had a piece of pine wood in his hands and a look of intense concentration on his face. He was trying to whittle a shape with a small safety knife I had given him. Maria was in the garden, winterizing the rose bushes I had planted for Catherine years ago. She waved her hands covered in soil. The foundation was running smoothly. We had broken ground on the first housing project in the city, a complex of 50 affordable units named the Catherine Ford Community Center. It was going to change lives. But right here on this porch was where the real work was happening. I sat down next to Leo. He held up the wood. "It is supposed to be a bear, Mr. Ford," he said, critically examining the lumpy piece of wood. "But it looks like a potato." I chuckled, taking the wood from him. "You are rushing it, Leo. You are trying to find the bear before you have cleared away the wood. Look at the grain. You have to work with it, not against it." I guided his small hands, showing him how to angle the blade. We sat there for an hour, the wood shavings curling onto our boots, the sun dipping low behind the trees. Mr. Ford, Leo asked, not looking up from his work. "My mom says you used to build skyscrapers. Is that true?" "It is true," I said. "Why did you stop?" "Because I realized that building high does not matter as much as building strong," I told him. "A skyscraper is just glass and steel. Leo, it is cold. But this..." I tapped the wooden bear which was starting to take shape. "This is something you made with your own hands. It has your sweat in it. It has your time in it. That makes it valuable. Never let anyone tell you that working with your hands is less important than working with a checkbook. The world has enough people who sign checks. It needs more people who can build the table the check is signed on." Leo nodded, solemn and serious, taking the lesson to heart. He was a good boy. He was the grandson I should have had, and in a way he was the second chance I never expected. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, I looked out over my land. The survey stakes were a distant memory. The threat of the bulldozers was gone. I had my home. I had a family, not by blood, but by bond. And somewhere in a prison cell, my daughter was folding sheets and learning what it meant to earn her keep. I stood up, brushing the sawdust from my pants. "Come on, Leo," I said. "Let's go inside. Maria is making stew. And tomorrow we are going to start on that birdhouse. We are going to build it right. Strong foundation, good roof, something that will last." We walked into the cabin, the warm light from the windows spilling out into the gathering dark. I closed the door, shutting out the cold, shutting out the past. I was Garrison Ford. I was a builder. And I was finally home. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. True wealth is not what you leave in a bank account when you die. It is what you leave in the hearts of the people who knew you. It is the integrity you show when no one is watching. It is the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. Do not build your life on the shifting sands of greed. Build it on the bedrock of character. Because when the storm comes, and it always comes, that is the only thing that will be left standing. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories of justice and redemption. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable lesson you have learned from your own family? I read every single one. Thank you for watching.